All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Rocco Wu. I'm the Games and Animation Director at APCA, and we're really excited for this workshop. This is our first Games and Animation event for the new initiative at Asian Pacific Cinema Association. And today we have Melody Wang, a junior studying interactive media and games at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, and she'll be presenting this Writing for Games workshop, which will teach you how to write for games and interactive stories to bring your world and characters to life. She was working at Bungie, the studio that developed the Halo series and Destiny this past summer, and she'll be returning next year to write their new game. So, without further ado, Melody, give it up.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. So this is the Writing for Games workshop. I want to apologize in advance because it's less of a workshop and more of just straight up talk, just because there's a lot to cover. And I also want to apologize because I actually tricked you all. This is actually called the Narrative Design for Noobs workshop. It's not the Writing for Games workshop. Because in my opinion, if you're writing for games, you're always going to be doing some kind of design. So Rocco gave a quick introduction, but just to go further on that, I'm an interactive games major, graduating next summer. I'm also a narrative designer and writer. I entered at Bungie last summer. This game, Curtain Call, I worked on last year with a group of friends, a visual novel that we released on Steam. I'm currently the narrative lead on Hindsight, which is Rocco's advanced games project, the capstone for the games majors here at USC. I'm a dungeon master for Dungeons and Dragons and TFGs. I play games, which makes me very qualified. And I also have some experience in traditional creative writing as well as screenwriting. Now I kind of want to get a sense for like who's in the room here. So can you raise your hand if you're in the games department? And then if you're in film, and then if you consider yourself a writer or aspiring writer. Oh, thank you. And then I see a picture here. So cool. So here's a brief, quick overview what we're going to go through. First, I'm going to explain to you what is narrative design because I did trick all of you. And then I'm going to tell you how to do narrative design, and then I'm going to tell you how to learn narrative design. So here we go. Quick disclaimer, I'm not an expert. I'm still a student like all of you, so I'm still learning and growing, but I do have a couple of years experience, so I'm just going to share with you what those years have taught me. But here we go. First off, what is narrative design? So simply put, writing for games, the title that you all came to this workshop for. In not so simple terms, it's going to encompass all of these things. So blue is what you might consider more writing or narrative, and red is what you might consider more design or more game development. But narrative design will encompass all of these things. And more than all of those things too. That is a non-exhaustive list. So this is a quote I really like. It's from this guy on Twitter named Doc Burford, this game developer. He says the game is a story and all of the elements of the game have to serve the story. So when you're doing narrative design, you are working to tell that story in the game. So you're really going to touch every part of the game. And now you might be thinking, because we're hosted by the Asian Pacific Cinema Association, I can write movies and books, and that's like the same thing, right? I've written a movie, I know how to write a game. And the answer is no, absolutely not. So games versus these other mediums that we might think of traditionally as writing. The most important thing to keep in mind here is that they are interactive. That is what makes them special and unique as a medium. So the things to consider here is that your players get to experience and interact with the environment and the narrative hands-on. You know, they're pressing the keys to move through the environment, or they're clicking buttons to really affect things. And that means that your players are hopefully immersed in the world and they have their own agency and freedom to choose what they're going to do. So when you're thinking about creating narratives for games, you really have to think about what kind of people are going to play your game. Because some people are not going to care about the story at all. You know, these are the people that when they see like press spacebar to skip cutscene, they're just going to hit that spacebar right away, right? They don't want to see any of it. They're going to turn off the audio. They're not going to listen to any of the dialogue. They're not paying attention. Some players are on the complete opposite spectrum. They're going to care a lot. These are the people that are like paying close attention to every detail and every cutscene. They're like looking for the little hidden lore books. They're like looking for each piece of dialogue. They replay the game so that they can select all the different options, right? And most will be somewhere in between that scale. So when you're thinking about writing for games, remember they're not movies, they're not novels, they are games. So things like the hero's journey, we've all heard that from high school English, right? That might not translate one-to-one to a game. Whereas in a novel, you can sort of trace that, or in a movie, you can trace the three-act structure. In a game, you might have a level and the player dies 10 billion times before they beat the level. So they're stuck there for like 3 hours. And then suddenly, pacing's all traditional pacing, all thrown off. Or like Hero's Journey, you have that refusal of the call stage, right? What are they going to do? Put down the game they just spent $30 on? Like, no, they're not going to refuse the call. They bought the game so they can go play it. So players have agency. And then another thing to consider with games is that some games might not even have a linear story at all. So if you think of a game like Tetris, we've all played Tetris, right? What's the story of Tetris? None, right? There's no story per se. Or like if you think of a game like Overwatch, there's no linear story you're following. Each of the characters may have backstory that you can sort of like piece together and follow, but there's no linear 3 arc. I can find this plot beat, this plot beat, this plot beat. So these are things you have to consider when you're thinking about writing for games. So this also means, this might sound very scary. You're like, okay, but then how do I do it, right? But the good thing about this is that you can do really cool things that you can't do in these other mediums. For example, each player might be able to have a unique experience based on their agency and the theater shows. For example, if you're navigating through a level, right, one player might go this way, another player might go this way. So they'll see different things and experience that level differently. Or the player that fails a level 3,000 times will have a completely different experience to the player that beats it on their first try. Games also have a very unique ability of immersing the player, because as I said, you're moving through the space on your own, you get to control things. You can also say things without saying them, and this other mediums can do as well, such as in film, you have visual storytelling where the elements in the background might inform things, and color choices, like that. Games also can do that through gameplay as well. And then you can do cool stuff like emergent and procedurally generated narratives. Don't worry if you don't know what this word means. I will explain them very briefly in the end, but this talk is not really about this. So some games are more like movies. These are a couple examples. These two on the left here are by Quantic Dream, the David Cage game studio from France. And then Dear Esther here is a walking simulator. So these games are more movie-like. You might see them referred to as more like interactive movies rather than games, but you asked. And then walking simulators, these are games that are sort of minimal on gameplay. The only real gameplay is you're walking, simulating walking, But these are not like bad per se, they're just different. They are still, ways of telling narratives in games. Some games are so movie-like that you can put all their cutscenes together to make a movie. For example, The Last of Us, you might see this 5.5-hour compilation of all the cutscenes, and you're like, oh yeah, I have to watch that and understand the whole narrative. Or Beyond Two Souls game, Series 5, you can piece together all the cutscenes and make a movie. Again, not a bad thing, just another approach. So, real quick before we dive into things, what does this career look like in practice? So if I get a job as a narrative designer at a studio or as a writer at a studio, what am I doing? And the answer is it depends on the studio. So some studios, everyone is a narrative designer. If you're like a writer at the studio, and some studios there's writers and then there's narrative designers, there's a difference. So it really depends. If we go back to the slide with the bubbles, if you're like a studio that splits the two, the blue things are going to be if you're a writer, you're doing that. The red things, if you're a narrative designer, you're doing those. But it really depends. Day to day, you're going to be collaborating a lot with other disciplines, such as art and design, audio, etc. And some studios might have a writer's room, which those of you in film, you know what that is, where a bunch of writers get together and rip off each other's ideas, try stuff together. You're also going to be supporting the other disciplines you're collaborating with a bit. And then in the meeting times, you're doing various areas. So writing, you might be researching something, editing analysis, things like that. As for the production cycle, a lot of your tasks will also depend on where the project is in development. So earlier on, you might be establishing themes, doing lots of world building, doing pillars, or designing narrative systems. Whereas middle to late stages, you're going to be doing more actual writing in terms of character dialogue, iterating on those things, such as that. So here we go. How do I do narrative design? I do want to give a spoiler warning. I'm going to spoil The Last of Us for you. I'm going to spoil.
That's our game.
Yes, I apologize. The Last of Us will be spoiled. It is almost 10 years old, so sorry.
Get the chat open.
Yes. Oh boy. Okay. I'll put it up there.
All right, cool.
I'm also going to spoil Destiny 2 for you, specifically the Forsaken expansion, which came out a couple years ago. Sorry. And I'm also going to spoil Life is Strange for you, which also came out a couple years ago. So hopefully that's okay. They're all old. Sorry. But here you go. If I can click. So first of all, the structure and format of the narrative that you're designing, it's going to depend really heavily. Sorry, a lot of the answers are just, it depends. But it's going to depend really heavily on what the game is. So campaign style, we talked about a little bit. It's more that 3-act structure, more linear, closer to movies. So games like the Call of Duty campaigns or The Last of Us or God of War, those are more like traditional, like if you know how to write a movie, you might have an easier time transitioning into writing one of those. RPGs, role-playing games, these are games that might have branching dialogue. They might have interaction between different characters that are in your party. They might have stuff like skill checks in order to see if you can choose certain pieces of dialogue. And they might have trackers in the back going like your relationship with other characters, stuff like that. Games with no linear story, we'll touch on this very quickly. These are MOBAs, so games like League of Legends or Dota 2. These are also competitive games such as Smash Bros. Or Valorant. These no linear story, right? You can't really follow this is happening and this is happening. And then live service, aka what the hell is going on? These are MMOs that are constantly releasing expansions where the story is constantly changing as you're going along. So if you're a long-time fan of these games, you're gonna get like a really nice, like long-term story going on. And some examples, Destiny 2 does this, Apex Legends does this, and World of Warcraft. And there are many other formats. And then the stuff listed under branching dialogue or under RPG, that stuff, you know, it's not exclusive to that genre. It's just more common than that. That goes for a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about. So this is a general guide for how I like to think about developing narrative games. So it's not like a start at the top and go to the bottom. It's more like the things at the top should always be influencing the things at the bottom. So when you're starting to create a narrative for a game, you might start with any of these bubbles. So for example, if I have a really cool idea for a piece of game, like I'm like the first game developer and I'm like, oh yeah, it would be so fun to shoot a gun in a game, right? In simulation. I can start there and then like expand from there and do all these bubbles. But the general rule of thumb I like to follow is that things up top, so your themes and your pillars should always be affecting your world building, your character, your plot, your emotion. And these two top rows should always be affecting what are called your narrative mechanics. So the methods by which you're delivering that story. Does that make sense? A little. Great. If anyone has like clarifying questions or you want me to explain something again, feel free to interrupt me. Well, so now we're going to dive into some actual like techniques for telling narrative games. And so we're going to start with the most obvious one, which is cutscenes. Everyone knows what a cutscene, right? It's a non-interactive movie-like sequence. So this is a really easy way to deliver narrative info and also in a very visually appealing way. The good thing about cutscenes in games is that you're taking away the player's agency. The good thing and a bad thing, because you're taking away the player's agency, which is like, no, but you're taking away the player's agency, which is like, they can't teabag your dead character, right? They can't like try and shoot someone that's talking, right? That's the good thing. And these can be really emotionally effective because they're so unstructured, right? But they're also non-interactive. And we talked about games, their strength is that they're interactive. So let's look at some examples. Here is one from The Last of Us.
Huh? Run off my path, put yourself in risk. Pretty goddamn stupid.
Well, I guess we're both disappointed. Admit that you got your
He knows this. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to get better than I'm supposed to myself.
Stop with the bullshit. What are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't say.
I'm supposed to roles that we have.
Well, Steve, you're doing all right so far.
And now you can do it even better with Tom.
You can see you've got really strong actors and you've got like really strong writing. A cutscene can be super emotionally affecting. Here's another example. This is a death scene from Destiny 2. Be super emotionally affecting. You can also use like some traditional cinema techniques here where you're thinking about like the positioning of the camera, the layout of the shot. Like this shot is emotionally affecting. You couldn't exactly do that if you kept the player's agency here. And again, you would have, if you kept the player's agency there, you would have players teabagging the dead body. So good thing about cutscenes. Another downside of cutscenes though is that they are typically very expensive and take a lot of time to make, but they are very effective. Next up, we have something called barks. So if you've never done narrative for games before, you might be thinking, what the hell is a bark? Which I wouldn't blame you. Barks are basically variations of voice lines activated by triggers. So if you think about, like, for example, a character in a game like Valorant activating their ability, the variations of the voice line that plays are all barks. Another thing you can think about is like if in a game like Call of Duty, someone's throwing a grenade, you might be like, incoming is a bark, and then another one's like, grenade, 5 o'clock, that's another bark. So it's just variations on delivering the same info. So barks are very short and sweet. So they're succinctly communicating character, emotion, plot, and gameplay. And generally, when you're writing a bark, you want to hit at least one of these, ideally multiple of them. So these are also random phrases as you're moving through an area. So like in an open world game like Skyrim, say, like if you're walking past a guard and the guard like goes, "Hey, who are you?" Like that's a bark. Or they might go like, "Oh, you're the Dragonborn, right?" That's a bark. So here are some examples in case that all went over your head. This is from Valorant.
In the words of our server, the cat five. This is the thing. You. What I want.
So you can see those are all variations of if you get a flawless round, she says any one of those. And you know, and then Apex Legends has a lot of barks. They call them quips, but so you can see those are all kill quips. So after a kill, you might say any one of those. And those are all marks. You can see they're just variations on the theme of I just killed someone. That was awesome. And you can see like how these characters sort of shining through with the lines about adrenaline and racing and stuff as well. You can also get marks that are interactions between different characters in the game. So these are communicating the relationship and can bring additional depth to your characters. So some really good examples here from Apex Legends again. So you can see that one immediately you're getting, there's some history there and damn, this dude's scary, right? And then here's some examples from League of Legends.
Perhaps it feels over can rest easy without you, James. But fine. Emil, I will not stop until I have all the answers. I cannot change the past, but together we can create a better future.
You can see there are variations based on which character she's killing. And then this picture right here is Party Mansion from Dragon Age Inquisition. I didn't include, but basically In this game and other games by the studio BioWare, they made Mass Effect as well. You can pick like out of a collection of characters who you want to take with you on various missions, and then those characters, depending on who you pick, will have different interactions. So getting to pick the characters you like and see how they interact with another element of interactions between characters. Next, branching dialogue story. So this is when you get to this kind of like dialogue wheel on this selection, where you get to choose what you're going to say and where it's going to go. So with these, your story may branch a lot, or it may branch not at all. And we're going to look at some of those different structures on the next slide. But the important thing to remember here that I like to think about is that the important thing is that your player is perceiving that they have some kind of choice, and maybe not in terms of like where the story is actually going, but in like how it's happening, right? You want them to feel like they're influencing, how their character is responding, even if maybe they're not influencing what is happening. So these are images from Mass Effect, BioWare, and whatnot. So here are some branching structures. There's a lot more, but these are just like some common ones. So the one top left here, I believe Sam Kilackwell, where that was pictured from, I think he called it the gauntlet, where there's basically that one golden path, right? And you may branch off, but the branches sort of cut you off. It's like a game over, or like a lose state, or it quickly brings you back to the main like golden path. The one right below that, I think it's called branching bottleneck, because you have those areas where it's all coming back. Like you may branch off, but you're gonna hit some like key story events that everyone sees. The thing with this one is that your early choices might end up accumulating and ending up giving you like different endings depending on like your earlier choices. So it sort of accumulates as you go. And then this one's really interesting to look at just to see like what you do with the game. This is a looping structure where basically you're repeating the same thing over and over, but as you repeat, new things are unlocking. So for example, an easy example is like a game about a time loop, right? You're going through the same sequence of events, but certain things are changing as you go around. New things are unlocking as you repeat the cycle. Branching dialogue can be made more complex with different variables. Does everyone know what a variable is? You know, it has some non. Okay. Okay, awesome. Yes, I'm glad someone said that. Okay, so it's a term taken from coding. It's basically like, imagine you're like saving a value and storing it and like remembering it. That's what a variable is. So in RPGs, I talked about this very briefly earlier, but like your ability to choose a dialogue option may depend on like a variable that's tracking like your points in a certain area. So for example, like if my trust with this character is over 50, I can say this to them, but if not, then I can't say it to them. Also very common is like, so I just talked about that, but it's very common for games to have that, but like invisibly in the background. So they won't tell you like your trust is not high enough, but like it'll be like, it just won't show you the option. Basically, this is a lot of tracking that's happening behind the scenes, and depending on the game that you're doing, you might want to have that. This picture is from Disco Elysium. It's a RPG with lots of different stat scores that you can look at, and basically these stat scores are always influencing what you do in that game. And then this is just an example of the third branching structure. Okay, before I move on to the next example, I do want to give a quick content warning for suicide. So can you step out of the room for like 1 to 2 minutes? Feel free to do so now. So this is an example of branching story with Life is Strange. The top picture is a choice that you get in the third episode of this game. It's an episodic game, where basically this character Kate is about to commit suicide and you have to talk her down. So you have to choose the right dialogue options in order to talk her down from jumping off the roof. The interesting thing that the developers of this game did here is that the right things to say are really not clear at any given point, but knowing the right things to say depends on whether in the previous episodes you took the time to get to know this character. Like you went out of your way and stopped to talk to her, or you went to her room and like looked around at her decorations and her pictures, then you would know like, oh, she has a sister, not a brother. So I should say your sister cares about you, not your brother cares about you. Right. So that's a really interesting way of going about it, where you're really like, if the game never tells you, like, get to know this character because you're going to have to talk them down. It just lets you have that option and then presents you with this. Another interesting choice is at the end of the Life is Strange game. It's like the big ending choice. You choose whether to sacrifice your best friend to save the town or sacrifice the town to save your best friend. And as a player, what you choose here is going to depend upon how you interpreted the events of the game leading up to this point, right? Whether the choices you made ended up having good conversation with the character and you think of them as like, oh, they're like your best friend, I really want to save them, or you were like, oh, I don't really like this character based on the interaction that I had with them. I'm okay with sacrificing them and saving them. So this is a good game that does branching story well. Moving along, we have dialogue. The rule of thumb here is that distinct characters create distinct dialogue, and if they don't, they're not distinct characters, or you're just writing bad dialogue. You're not. Writing good dialogue is a skill. You know, some people who may not be writers, they might think like, yeah, I can talk, I know how to write people talking, but you know, not necessarily the case. In terms of games, the thing to keep in mind with dialogue is that you usually have limited space to communicate what you want to. So in games, you might be limited by the number of lines a character is allowed to speak. For example, if you have like a limited budget to get a voice actor, you might only have to be able to speak 5 things when you want them to say 10 things. And then also the length of those lines might be consideration, other different variables. So when you're writing dialogue, every line needs to matter. And again, with the BARCs, you're trying to communicate character, emotion, plot, and gameplay. Hopefully, multiple of those things, but ideally at least one of them. Next, strings. So this is another coding term, so it's okay if you don't know what a string is. It's basically just a sequence of characters. So in games writing, strings are specifically item, ability, character, names, or descriptions. So this is also what you might think of as flavor text, like item descriptions. And what you're trying to do here is you're trying to subtly communicate narrative details through very deliberate phrasing choices. So this is an example I really like from Destiny 2. I forgot to source it, but it's from Destiny 2. So there's a gun called the Delicate 2. It's a fusion rifle, so nuclear fusion. And this flavor text word is the danger within is repulsive to us. So upon first glance, you're like, cool, fusion rifle, when you just shoot it, right? If you look a little closer, you can see art, narrative, and design are all working really closely together here. This Wikipedia page I have a screenshot of is messages that basically there's long-term nuclear waste storage, and these are the messages they were trying to explain non-verbally. They wrote out verbally, like, this is what it should convey. So some examples, the danger is still present in your mind as it was in Mars. The danger is to the body and it can kill. Stuff like that, right? Very like ominous, but like you're getting like a sense of danger, right? So the danger within is repulsive to us could very easily fit here. And either nuclear, long-term nuclear waste, nuclear fusion rifle, start to choose together, right? And then on the left there, that's concept art for this gun. You see it says on the bottom there, it's small, a plume of dust when replacing the magazine. So you have like ash coming out of the gun. It's a nuclear fusion rifle. And the description is the danger within is repulsive to us, and the name is Delicate 2. So you can see here kind of like this is very subtle. Like if you weren't paying attention to it, you wouldn't even really maybe realize. But you can see it's very deliberate naming choice, very deliberate flavor text, and very deliberate art choices, all sort of working together to communicate this narrative. This is another example for very distinct or very deliberate string choice. This is from Multiversus, the new fighting game where they're sort of taking characters from all the different IPs and smashing them all in one game. This is Finn from Adventure Time. These are his ability names. Chop, the sword stuff. Flasher, blow, bro. Slam bam in a can. Flying sword move. Sky punch, ground chop. Very like energetic, yeah, right? Compare that to Arya Stark from Game of Thrones. Needle strike. Sharp edges, upward slash, rolling slash, knife flourish, aerial slash, rolling stab, stinger. So these, in comparison to slam bam and can, very precise, right? Very formal. Aerial slash, very descriptive, right? So you can see here, through these like ability names, you're communicating with character, you're communicating sort of the vibe, right? So even the little things matter. Next, prose. We all know what prose is. A book. This is a lot more common in visual novels and RPGs, but some games may also have stuff like lore books or like lore entries, where it's literally just like find a piece of paper and you read a thing, right? And that's prose. So if you're limited budget or resources, this is a really great way to supplement if you like don't have budget for visuals, or if you're like not that great an artist and you're working alone, you can just write stuff like you would in a book. The difference here, I would say, is, you know, depending on the game, it might fit better or worse. So this game right here is called Citizen Sleeper, and it's a game that uses prose to communicate every aspect of its narrative. So basically, any action you take in this game, you're going to get like a bit of prose that's like describing what you're doing. It's dialogue. This game, it builds in prose as a narrative mechanic from the very beginning. From the moment you buy the game and start playing it, you're like, oh, I'm going to be doing some reading in this game. This is how this game is going to be communicated. Compare that to, sorry, I'm slandering my employer, but the first Destiny, they had these things called grimoire lore entries, which is basically you find a thing in the world and then you open your inventory, click on it, and it gives you this lore entry that you can go read, right? Destiny, for those of you who don't know, it's very fast-paced, like action FPS shooter. So, like, it doesn't really fit too well that you're like running and shooting things and then, oh, like a little section real quick, right? And then you can also tell that it's not super great implementation for narrative in the game because they literally compiled those lore entries into a physical book that you can buy, right? And then you can just read it. So that's how you know it's like not super well integrated in the gameplay. Yes.
Yeah, question. For example, you find a lot of returning a lot of piece of paper that and they all tell like the narrative stories of some people that were living in the space what happened to them, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That because you like those or
Yeah, I would consider that prose just because it's like a block of text, right? But I think in The Last of Us's case, it actually works well because The Last of Us is a story of post-apocalypse, right? There's a zombie apocalypse, people died, right? In a zombie apocalypse, people are gonna write notes to each other, right? So it fits well because it's like it works in the world of the game.
yeah, well, for example, something you just gave like this yeah, that was made solely to
Yeah,
purpose of having the player read something in case about the card.
pretty much. It was just like, yeah, find this thing, you get a lore thing in your inventory, and you can go read it to learn more. So it's not great in that aspect. But yes. I haven't played Control, but audio recordings, I would say yes. You could categorize it as a separate thing, but it's like another thing where it's like the writer sat down and wrote a bunch of text and then like put it through, like, get a voice actor, right? But it's so it's a little better, I think, because like they can do things while listening to it. I assume. Okay. So it's a little better. It's the thing with pros is like sometimes you'll get players that like don't want to read. And like it's okay to get those players because like your game's just not for them. Like there is a such thing as a target audience. Your game that they're just not it. But like if you put it in a big game, like sometimes you get like Destiny, it's a very big game, very big audience. Like you'll get players that just skip over that because they don't want to read. They didn't come to this game to read.
Would be like to say that some stuff like that there is like pretty much like functional narratives.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
because of what you said, right?
Yeah,
For
exactly.
example, are like the options of player so quote unquote get more into.
Yeah, I definitely think it's okay to have those optional bits for like I spoke very negatively about the Destiny Grimoire text, but it is okay to have stuff like that where it's like if you get those players that are super interested in the narrative, they can go and find it. It's definitely okay to cater those players. It's just, you know, keep in mind that not everyone's gonna read it. So if you want everyone to read it, maybe don't do it like that. All right, next is environmental storytelling. So this is space and visual design, basically saying things without actually saying them. So here we take a lot of cues from themed entertainment here. So stuff like theme parks and escape rooms. And basically you're communicating a story that can be told just by observing the environment. So this is from Disneyland. Disneyland does really great themed design. Like when you're at Disneyland, you're like at Disneyland, you're like in a magical world, like the happiest place on earth, right? So this is from Pirates of the Caribbean ride. So when you're going on this ride, like you can see the skeletons sitting around having drinks and playing chess together, right? No words. Like they don't tell you Ron is battling Dave in a game of chess. No, you just see it and you're like, oh, they're playing chess. They must be friends. Like, you know? Another game that does environmental storytelling really interestingly and really well is Fallout 4. This is a post-apocalyptic game where there's basically been like a nuclear war and everything. Oh God, crap. So around the world of Fallout 4, you'll find skeletons in weird positions doing weird things. So this is a skeleton at a urinal with another skeleton head. The skeleton bothering? It might be. I just looked up Fallout 4 skeleton and this came up. Yeah, but like if you just come across this in your open world exploration, you feel like there's a story here. Something happened here. And then on the left there, that's from the last one. Kind of hard to see, but it's two skeletons. The last was a zombie story. So it's two bodies at opposite ends of a bathtub that are dead. So there, you know, you can get a story from that. Like maybe think, like, oh, like maybe they died together. Maybe they decided to like die together in this bathtub. They're sort of sitting together, right? And then a real world example is like if you see muddy shoes by a door, like there's no words needed, you know, someone went hiking and came back, and like it's now in the house, you know. Next is probably the most game specific we're gonna get is storytelling through mechanics. So this is where you're building mechanics that support the narrative, and the game dev specific term I'm going to use here is verbs, which is basically the actions you can take in a game. So the verbs of Mario are run, jump. That's pretty much it for Mario. But basically what you're doing here is you're making sure that your mechanics and your story are working together and they're not clashing. So the other very game specific term here, and we're getting very, this is as scholarly as this talk is going to get, is the term ludonarrative harmony. Ludo comes from ludology, which is the study of games, and narrative is narrative. So basically you want your game and your story to be in harmony. You don't want them to be like clashing against each other. So the clearest example here is combat in fighting games. If I'm in a fighting game playing as Scorpion in Mortal Kombat, you know, I'm beating people up. I know that Scorpion is someone capable of beating people up. He's a martial artist. He likes fighting, you know, or shooting in an FPS. There's a reason that all the Call of Duty campaigns are like centered around war. It's because a war story is very conducive to shooting and grenade gameplay. But those are the clearest examples, but there's a lot of room for creativity and innovation here. These two games are games that I think are really innovative in this area. Unpacking, I love using Unpacking as an example. It's a puzzle game where you basically start each level with a bunch of boxes and you have to unpack the boxes and put everything in the correct place. But this game has no words or story beyond the title of each level, which is like 2009 fall, 2012 spring. But through those like time jumps and the visuals of like, oh, this is a childhood bedroom, or like this is one bedroom in a house that I'm unpacking things into, or oh, this is like a college dorm room, or like, oh, this is an apartment that somebody else already has things in, and now I'm unpacking. You can track that thread. You're like, oh, I'm a child. Oh, I'm in college. Oh, I'm moving in with significant other. Oh, I moved out of my significant other since we must have broken up. So this game, no cutscenes, no nothing. It's just a puzzle game, but you can track that story and it does it really, really well. I highly recommend it. It's only like 2 hours long. Go play it. This game down here is called Before Your Eyes. It's a game where you control the game by blinking. So you get these symbols and you blink at it in order to advance the story. This one is just super immersive because when you blink, your character blinks and you're like you start the game off as like a child, right? And your parents are like, oh, look over here. And then you look and you blink and they're like, oh, hi. So very, very immersive, very innovative mechanic where the verb is blink. And the verb for unpacking is sort, unpack, you know? So there's a lot of room for innovation in this area. The last thing you're going to do as a narrative designer is collaborate. game development is a team sport. Hopefully you've gotten that message from all the previous slides. Working with other disciplines to embed narrative in every aspect of the game makes the whole game better. The game is a story and every element is serving that story. So there's really no discipline you're not going to work with if you're a narrative designer. This is a Twitter thread about League of Legends items. I hate using League of Legends as an example, but they do good stuff. So this is a really clear example of art and narrative working together, where narrative has crafted this whole world, right? And in this world, there's a region called the Freljord. It's like an icy region, and it doesn't tell you in game, these are the items from the icy region of game. No, it's blue. It looks like ice, and then you can be like, oh, this must be the icy region. Right? Really great. And very briefly, said these terms at the beginning, and like 90% of you can't like. Procedural and emergent narrative, this is very new, I would say, and people are starting to do it more and more. But quickly coming to terms, procedurally generated means you're using a few guidelines to create lots of content via computer algorithms. So like you set a couple of rules and then the AI takes certain things for you. And then emergent narrative is unwritten story that emerges via interaction between the player and the game. So basically any story that you are not writing, but the player is sort of piecing together on their own and like creating a narrative in their head. And basically how this works is human brains are very good at identifying patterns, and they're very good at seeing story in things where there might not be story, or they like seeing story. So basically the player is going to look at a bunch of events that may like seemingly be disconnected or not have any story attached, and then they're going to create something in their head that sort of follows the pattern. So these are a couple games that, examples of games that do this. I'm not going to go over how they do it. If you really want to know more, you can ask me or look this up on your own with these terms attached, and you'll find something. The thing to keep in mind with procedural and emergent narrative is you're really learning from tabletop RPGs. They have this thing called the fruitful void, which is basically the things that are unwritten are as important as the things that are written. So the void produces lots of fruits. Which answer depends. I would say it depends on the game. Like if you have a linear game, like a lot of things are going to be written. But like if your game is something like a puzzle game, like you really don't want to bog it down there while playing. Like if your focus is I'm making a puzzle game, you probably don't want to put a bunch of story in there. Like Candy Crush, like you get like there's probably a story there, but like not really much. So if you have, I would say if your game is not so like mostly centered around story, then you probably want to keep most of the story unwritten. So like The Sims is a simulation game first and foremost. Like they don't tell a linear story, but The Sims does emergent narrative where like my sim like went to work and then came home, but they didn't use the bathroom all day, so now their bladder is full and now they're just it's on the floor. That's a story, right? But the developer didn't sit down and write like this sim is gonna go to work without like they didn't sit down and write like this is gonna happen in every sim in the game. It's just something that happened randomly based on the systems of the game interacting, and then now you as a player are seeing that and being like, oh, happened here. Here, this is very practical now. Here are some tools for all the different things you're going to be doing. The one thing that might stick out as a little weird is this one, spreadsheets. Game writers love spreadsheets because it makes it easy for the rest of your team to implement things. So spreadsheets. I won't go into like how to set up spreadsheets stuff for game writing because that's really specific, but just know that if you're a game writer, you're going to be writing in a spreadsheet. Yeah, finally, how do I learn narrative design? Oh boy, we're at 8.5. I'm gonna speed through this. First and foremost, write games. You can write games on your own. There are some tools. Twine is my favorite. It's a branching narrative tool. Very, very powerful. It may seem simple, but you can do a lot of cool things with it. And then the other ones, you can look at them at your own time. And then with others, I would highly recommend doing game jams. Okay, like can I be a writer on your game for this like 48-hour thing? If you don't know what a game jam is, it's like a very short event where you create a game in like 48 hours or 7 days or 2 weeks. You know, just make a game real quick. You can also, yes.
Get the slides.
Yes.
That's about right.
Yes, I will send we will send the slides out after, so don't worry about writing it all down. Also learn other games development disciplines. I'm not gonna talk about this, because I already told you. Collaborate, learn other things. It will make you a better narrative designer. Most importantly, whenever you're writing a game or a story or whatever, finish your project. Don't leave like 50 abandoned works, because abandoned things cannot be shown, or they can be, but you won't be happy about it. So finish your work and share it with others, get feedback, because you need to get used to showing your work to other people and getting feedback on it. I used to hate doing it, and now I do it like every day, and it's like not a big deal. Play games. All these games are great to look at. All the games I used as examples are great to look at. I listed what to look for in these games, but you can also just look for general stuff. Here are some practical exercises that I won't go over, but we'll send the slides out, and if you have questions about them, email me. Practice other mediums. Skills will carry over. For example, film, cutscenes, dialogue skills, it will carry over, and basic storytelling skills will carry over. Use resources, follow people on Twitter, read books. I love these 2 books. I haven't read the second one, but I've heard it's great. Look at talks, interviews, articles. There's a lot of free lectures from Game Developers Conference, GDC, and I'm here as a resource. If you have questions about anything in the slideshow, just email me. And we don't have time. Thank you.
Have the room until like 80 minutes. Maybe we have like 1 or 2 questions.
How do you and your team find a good balance between subtext and just presenting it in front of others?
Play testing. If the players are not getting it and you really want or need them to get it, then it's a little more obvious. But yeah, if it's something subtle that you really want it to be subtle, then like leave it, and you're really like dedicated to it. I really want to get this without me saying it outright, then keep it that way. You know, that's your decision. But if it's something where you're like, oh, I want people to understand this, then you know, iterate, make it more and more obvious until you're happy with it.
I'm assuming this question is about the points. How did you get the interest on the what kind of share for the process? How was what was the interesting apply like so anyone interesting to get something like that?
Yeah, definitely. Narrative design and writing internships in games are unfortunately very hard to come by, because it's like still a pretty new discipline in games. Because when games started, like everyone that was making games was like, I can write a game, and then quickly we learned no. So with Bungie, I saw the posting, I applied. I'm gonna try not to break my NDA. I applied, they sent me a narrative test. I got that back. I did an interview and then got the job. Yeah, the application was a resume, and I also sent them my portfolio site. So if you're looking to break into games, you need the portfolio website where you put all your projects and work and stuff.
Pretty basic.
For portfolio, is it just game projects, or can you send like?
You can submit other pieces of writing. It depends on what company. Sorry, my answers are all. It depends on the company you're applying for. Like if you're applying to a game studio that you know makes like MOBAs. Like if you're applying to Riot and you really want to work on League of Legends. League of Legends doesn't have cutscenes, so maybe don't put a screenplay on your portfolio unless that's like film you have. But ideally, you would be like writing barks and putting that on your portfolio. So I would cater your portfolio and what's on it to the company you're applying for. Yeah, but you can put non-games on your portfolio. Yes.
Okay. How do you work? How do you like interplay your work with like the work of composers and artists working on the same project?
Yeah, definitely. With artists, it's a little clearer because they're making art that is gonna like be part of your narrative, right? So it's a little more clear on that standpoint where you're explaining to them or they have questions and you're telling them the narrative information that they need in order to, you know, create art that supports the vision, that the shared vision you're all working towards. With composers, different composers will want different things, but in general, a lot of composers, it's good to give them like sort of the emotional, like through line of your games. Like if you're asking them to make a track for like a specific level, you want to tell them like what's leading up to that, what happens during that, and what's coming out of that, so that they have like emotional and narrative context for what they're writing, and that it like interplays well. So basically just talk to them, tell them, they'll ask you questions and you can tell them.
Cool. One last thing. Can we all take a photo? Kind of squeeze in the middle.
Yeah.
Wait, can we go this side because yeah. So let's go. Wait, I can take it. Oh, sure. Down it over here.
So, this side, here.
I'm going to. Start the show. All right. Yeah. Ready?
Wait.
Everyone gather. But I think right there, your projector was still on. Yeah. Oh, turn off.
I only. Oh.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not bad.
Oh, there you go.
All right, everyone. Go 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Melody. Thank you so much. And thank you to people on Zoom
Thanks, Sue.
but in the recording.